Eating bacon every day increases your absolute risk of cancer by 0.81%. That's not a good article. Nobody's clicking on that. But in these articles, there's no distinction between absolute risk and relative risk, which is just such a disservice. Like, if you're actually trying to provide information to people, you take the time, you understand the difference between absolute and relative risk, and you present that information. So today I just wanted to briefly kind of go over the distinction between absolute risk and relative risk. So the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times, unless you're reading the actual research study or the published article, it's probably going to be misrepresented when you're talking about weight loss, risk of a certain disease, whatever it might be. If you're reading about it not in whatever its original published kind of form was, it's probably misrepresented. There's probably not going to be a mention of relative risk versus absolute risk. So this first kind of piqued my interest. Like, it might have been 2 years ago when something came out and saying like eating bacon is now as bad as smoking. So then I did a lot of research into why bacon is bad, and it turns out bacon leads to colorectal cancer. And the study that kind of prompted all this was one that found that eating, I think, 50 grams, so like 2 strips of bacon a day, can increase your risk of getting colorectal cancer by up to 20%. That's the first article that I read. It can increase your risk of colorectal cancer up to 20% or close to 20%. Some sort of phrasing like that. The actual number is 18%, so they rounded up because 20 sounds better than 18, and there was no mention of whether it was absolute risk or relative risk. If the absolute risk changed by 18%, I would be fucking losing my mind. But it's relative risk. The relative risk increased or could increase up to 18%. So what does that all mean? Using the example of like colorectal cancer, I think lifetime risk for men and women of getting colorectal cancer is like 4.5%. So we'll say 4.5, an 18% increase of that would get you to like 5.2 or 5.3%. So that's the absolute risk. The absolute risk goes up by, I'm actually gonna do the math on this one, I'm not just gonna guess. 0.81. Okay, 0.81. So the absolute risk increases by 0.81%, so less than 1%. So the absolute lifetime risk goes from 4.5% to 5.31%. Yes, it still goes up, but it's not the 18% increase in risk that everyone was led to believe. The 18% they're referring to is the relative risk. So this is where the distinction between absolute risk and relative risk is really important. So the new risk, 5.31%, is 18% higher than the old risk, 4.5%. That doesn't make for a good article online. That's not a good headline. Eating bacon every day increases your absolute risk of cancer by 0.81%. That's not a good article. Nobody's clicking on that. 18% or nearly 20%, which a lot of articles have, that's going to get people to click on it. That's going to scare the shit out of people. But in these articles, there's no distinction between absolute risk and relative risk, which is just such a disservice. Like, if you're actually trying to provide information to people, you take the time, you understand the difference between absolute and relative risk, and you present that information. You don't just try to scare the shit out of people by saying an 18% increase in risk from eating 2 strips of bacon every day. So I'm not trying to like disprove that study. That science is strong. Like the actual data, the research, like that doesn't change. Yeah, like the relative risk does increase by 18%. The absolute risk, it does increase by 0.81%. Like, I'm not gonna argue that. Just the way it's presented and the way most people kind of consume the information, that's done in a very poor manner. So taking it in another direction, it doesn't have to be risk regarding a certain food causing a certain disease like bacon and cancer. You know, anyone who's selling a weight loss pill, supplement, ab band, a weight loss whatever, they are always going to misrepresent the data to make their information and their product look a lot better. So the same thing happens. They'll probably present something as a percentage versus kind of a control group. So like if a weight loss pill company, they do a 1-month study of people taking their weight loss pill versus a control group for a month, and they can come back and say, the group that was using our miracle pill, they lost 100% more weight or 50% more weight than the control group. The question you have to ask is, how much weight did the control group lose? If the control group lost 1 pound in a month, and this group over here that was taking the miracle pill, they lost 1.5 pounds in a month, then yeah, they did lose 50% more weight than the control group. but it's only half a pound in a month. That's a shitty pill. That's a bad product. But 50% makes it seem like, holy crap, this is actually what a miracle. I'm gonna lose 50% more weight than I am right now. Well, you have to ask yourself, how much weight are you losing right now? If it's none, that's 50% of nothing. So the distinction between absolute and relative, that's always the question you need to be asking yourself when you read something online when it comes to any of these things. If you're reading it as a percentage, you need to figure out what the absolute change was. That's where you're gonna find out the real information. Problem is, a lot of times that you're reading this stuff, the article won't even link back to the original published study, which is really frustrating. So you either need to hunt around until you can find a link back to the original published study, or you just need to go directly to PubMed, something like that, and try to type in a few keywords until you can find it. It's not easy, and yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass, but if you wanna understand what that percentage that you're reading is, percentage weight loss, percentage of increased risk, percentage of decreased risk for X, Y, and Z disease, whatever it might be, you need to figure out the absolutes in the situation so you can actually understand what that percentage means.